Hello and welcome to the AMCP podcast series, Listen Up, as we take a deep dive into the challenges, trends, and opportunities in managed care pharmacy. Follow the show's social hashtag at AMCP Listen Up, and to learn more about AMCP, visit amcp.org. I'm your host, Fred Goldstein. On today's episode, brought to you by Janssen, our guests are Chronis Manolis, Senior Vice President, Pharmacy Services and the Chief Pharmacy Officer at UPMC Health Plan, and Michael Rothrock, former Vice President of Pharma Strategy and Contracting for Express Scripts. Welcome, Chronis and Michael.
Welcome, Fred. Happy to be here. This is Michael. I spent over 20 plus years in both the regional health plan, national insurer, and PBM industry with formulary management responsibilities, manufacturer contracting, and specialty injectables. Looking forward to the podcast.
Fantastic. And you, Chronis?
Yeah, likewise, Fred. My name is Chronis Manolis, and I've been with UPMC Health Plan as the SVP of Pharmacy for 17 years, responsible for all aspects of the pharmacy benefit. Prior to that, worked in the PBM and specialty pharmacy industry, and looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah, well, it's great to get you both on with all the experience you bring. So let's begin by discussing the three categories of biologics. We've got the originator biologic, a biosimilar, and an unbranded biologic. Perhaps you could start with what are they and how are they similar or how are they different? And why don't we go with you first, Michael?
Great question. So when we think about biologics in general, whether they are the innovator, a biosimilar, or an unbranded biologic, they're all reviewed kind of similarly, and I'm using that word very loosely, within the P&T and the walls of the PBM. The indications are going to be critical. The interchangeability designation will be critical. The coverage and formulary access will be driven a lot by manufacturer relationships, pricing and contracting, and current volume on the market, whether it's an established brand and or a new chemical entity or a new biosimilar or unbranded option. So regardless of the approval pathway, whether it is the innovator or a biosimilar or an interchangeable designation, they still all go through our P&T. To us, they're the same. To us in our P&T, they would be viewed as interchangeable, meaning with whether we have to grandfather or not will be based on the interchangeable designation. But our P&T committee does not believe we only have to influence new starts. We can switch patients if we so chose to do so on any patient today.
Mm-hmm. And how about yourself, Chronis?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with pretty much everything that Michael said. I think what I would add is that, an unbranded, if it's coming off the same line as the innovator product, may provide at least emotional advantages. I don't know that it's going to matter to the P&T. It may matter to prescribers, it may matter, et cetera. But, essentially, these are all products that we look at from a coverage standpoint. And it really, again, depends on things like interchangeability, timing, indications, et cetera.
And I think perhaps, Michael, you could discuss just the fact, how are they chemically similar or dissimilar for some of the people that may not understand that?
Well, chemically, they should technically be very similar. Every biologic batch, whether it's an innovator, a biosimilar, or an unbranded, it's going to have sensitivities of the amount of true molecule in that batch, because there's variations among batches. So from a chemical entity perspective, it doesn't matter if you're an infliximab or an adalimumab. They're all still based off that core molecule, whether it's innovator, biosim, or unbranded. The infliximab, in my example, is still the core for each of them. How they're named, how they're designated, and the approval pathway is really determined from the FDA process. But our P&T and our payer community will view those as the same molecule. The differences are going to be, A, do they have a brand name? B, are they truly interchangeable at the point of sale? And C, formulary access and coverage is going to determine how a physician and or a patient becomes aware of those three different types of entities. Product lines: innovator, biologic, unbranded.
And I would add, this notion of extrapolation on indication will certainly play out. If you think about interchangeability, everyone thought that was really a showstopper. There is an assumed interchangeability, to Michael's point, that they're all the same chemical. Even an innovator is going to vary batch to batch. I think the indication piece is, can you extrapolate indications? I think that played very favorably on the medical side of the house. And I don't expect it to be any different on the pharmacy side of where these products are used. So to me, it's all about the chemical, and we're going to assume that it got through FDA approval, that they're essentially the same.
And when you think about it, I mean, maybe some people have not heard much about unbranded biologics, but obviously coming out, how are they in terms of safety and efficacy as compared to the originator or innovator molecule?
Again, I mean, they should be the same. I mean, that's what the trials are for. That's why the data package that goes to the FDA is looked at. But unless you have some major differences, I would say, in the manufacturing process or different excipient ingredients, I would expect them to be the same.
And this is Michael. I would agree 100% with that. I mean, the FDA is going to make that determination about it if it's safe and efficacious, whether that's through indication they've studied and the extrapolation process. As long as we have that, we're off to the races. Then to us as payers and P&T committee members and influencers for coverage, it's going to be determined by these are the same. The molecule is the molecule, and we can intertwine them each amongst each other, whether that's innovator, biosim, or unbranded. I think the hang up with an unbranded product is going to be, it won't have a name. So if it only comes out as a molecule name, maybe with a suffix at the end of it, and not a true brand, it's like the field of dreams. If you build it, will they come? So if no one knows about it and isn't promoting it that way, who's going to technically write it? So the physician awareness, the patient awareness may be a little challenged unless that is being driven through a payer's formulary choice to drive that out in the marketplace. And I haven't seen that happen up to this point.
And just to add to that, Fred, I think there's two things. Oncology is arguably one of the most sensitive categories that we have. And I think you saw biosimilar adoption just, there was a little bit of hesitation, certainly no hesitation on supportive care agents like the white cell stimulators, et cetera. But even now with the big products that are chemo, there was pretty widespread adoption. So that tells me the confidence level is there. And to Michael's point, on the unbranded, I think timing has so much to do with it, right? If you come out as the last biosimilar, the market's already been saturated. If you come out, the first, there may be some advantages that, it may make for a more confident switch, particularly in areas like inflammatory disease, where you've got three physician specialties that are trying to all get on the same page around a specific product in their specific disease state.
And you've touched on the health plan, looking at it. What are the real points they should consider when they look at these? Is it price? What are they looking for?
I think it's the same rubric. I don't think there's any different process. I think Michael described it. We're going to put it through all of the typical things that we do. We're going to look at the clinical data package, make sure that it satisfies everything that we need. And then we're going to look at, we'll look at the various other considerations, right? What's the disease specialty? Do we see anything there? Is price in line? Is it what we expect? All those kinds of things. This isn't your Lipitor that goes generic one day and within 30 days you have 99% saturation. A lot more considerations here. And I think that it doesn't change the review process, just adds considerations. For example, will the biosimilar manufacturer support the program like the innovator does from a patient hub and resources and education and all of those kinds of things? It has to be the same.
And I would even add to that, the unbranded biologic manufacturer needs to do the same type of support services. And how are they going to differentiate it versus maybe the innovator? And what is their message out to the market in order to get physician uptake and buy-in, whether it's for established patients or maybe converted patients. So you got to build the resources around it in order to make sure that awareness gets out there, because again, an unbranded biologic can kind of sit on a shelf without any awareness if no one's promoting it.
As you think about that, you've talked about the health plan or the payer and or PBM looking at this. What about from the physician or healthcare system perspective? How should they be approaching this?
Well, again, not to overcomplicate things, but, you've got medically administered biosimilars, and then you've got pharmacy dispensed. And so the added wrinkle when you have a health system that has revenue tied to some of these drugs, they're going to look first and foremost. A lot of it is driven by the payers in their catchment area. That's what's going to drive the formulary. Now, they could have their own house brand, if you will, that they like to use when there's no specification or there's no formulary involved. But from a prescribing perspective, and that transcends both of these, they have to have confidence that what they're prescribing is going to be, on par for the patient. Most physicians, it's certainly true in our world, a lot of physicians are in shared savings arrangements, partner arrangements, and they want to be a part of the solution. They can look at biosimilars as having less out of pocket for their patient and less overall cost to the system in general. And so I think those are very powerful, and physicians, they study the data. They are often, they go to their meetings, their society meetings, and, Europe has got a lot of data that's ahead of the US. And so what I've found is that there's a general comfort level with biosimilars.
Anything you'd like to add, Michael?
The only thing I would add is, we know biosimilars will have separate and dedicated J codes, so they can all be reimbursed on their own independent unit price based on the CMS regulatory per milligram dose or whatever it is, and their own ASP. But an unbranded, does that fall under the innovator J code like a generic would? Because if it does, then it's going to come down to the financials that a physician can ascertain through margin if they can buy the unbranded version at a much lower price and use that as their in-house, as Chronis mentioned, house brand product of choice for when they want to write that innovator product. So then they'll make more spread. They definitely have all the clinical buy-in and the same is same from the review process, and that they're going to do no harm to the patient and get the same outcomes. But if there's an opportunity for them to get lift on the margin side under the same J code as that innovator, at least until ASP catches up, they might be more influenced to do that in the next few quarters until ASP kind of falls to match that new number.
And that's one of the pitfalls, Fred, of medically administered J codes. In pharmacy, it's a little easier. You've got an AWP and you've got a WAC. On the medical side, you have everything from ASP-based reimbursement schedules to percent of charges to everything. And so, I haven't met a doc yet that will use a biosimilar that doesn't cost the patient less. And the variation in fee schedules that all of these payers have with health systems can cause some confusion. And then you overlay that with every manufacturer has their own strategy. They want to go high ASP, they want to go low ASP, high WAC, low WAC. And I think we have to do extra due diligence there to make sure that I use a wheel when I think about how biosimilars get adopted. There's 5 key stakeholders, right? There's a patient, the physician, the health plan, the specialty pharmacy, and pharma. And, can we check the box for all 5 of them? Then we got a pretty good shot at getting, real adoption there. Again, provided the drug is equivalent and clinically right and all those kinds of things.
This episode of the AMCP podcast series, Listen Up on Innovator Biologics, Biosimilars, and Unbranded Biologics with Chronis Manolis and Michael Rothrock, is brought to you by Janssen. Now, back to the interview. As we move to more value-based contracting, you've touched on this, risk-based contracting, things like that. Does it make more sense to really investigate stuff like that and say this is where we got to move with this within your plan or within your healthcare system?
And again, I know it's early. We haven't had a whole lot of appetite. Right? We've got a Center for Value-Based Pharmacy Initiatives here at UPMC where our doors are always open and the lights are always on, right? But with biosimilars so far, it's been really a financial game, right? It's been, where's the WAC compared to the ASP, et cetera. Mm-hmm. Will that change over time? I don't know. Michael probably has good perspective on that as well. I don't know that, I think access is king right now. And I don't know that people were thinking about value-based contracts in that space.
Yeah, I would add to this story, Fred, that Chronis hit it on the head here. From a biosimilar innovator, unbranded competition market basket, pricing is really driving a lot of the decisions today in that environment, whether that's under the pharmacy benefit and or the medical benefit. When we talk about value-based or outcomes-based, and there's very limited options in the market today, particularly in the autoimmune space, that's not the right model for this. I think a value-based, outcome-based model kind of lends itself to be more fruitful for a discussion around rare disease, gene therapy, high-cost drugs that have limited long-term outcome in their trial that the manufacturer is willing to put some type of endpoint at risk. Here in this today and now autoimmune space, whether it's an infliximab molecule and or an adalimumab or any autoimmune drug, it's so price competitive even pre-biosimilars, and it's just exacerbated with biosimilars, that there's minimal interest to do anything that puts the payer at risk for not achieving the best price.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess what I should have really phrased that from instead of value-based payment, when as you as an organization, for example, UPMC moves into risk-based contracts, maybe capitation or things like that, then obviously you begin to look at these issues a little bit differently and focus more potentially on price for the product.
Yeah, I think as long as everybody's aligned, look, we've got a pipeline out there of products that are incredible, and they're just starting to bear fruit, and now we've got the diabetes drugs. I look at biosimilars, regardless if they're unbranded or just regular biosimilars, as the answer to create the headspace so we can cover a lot of this innovation. Out of the gate, it's been a little clunky. And, I think that's to be expected. There's a lot of complexity. And Humira was really complex, right, in the autoimmune space for a lot of different reasons. So I think we're going to continue to get better and better. We'll see how it evolves. But I think the underlying feature is the more competition, the more the price should get better. Whether that competition comes from the innovator itself, its unbranded, sister or biosimilar products.
Fred, what I want to add to the audience here is an understanding that if I'm the manufacturer and I have an innovator and an unbranded biologic today, your message to the market needs to be a few points that are going to maybe illustrate the value of why you did this. One, it's the same as the legacy product. We manufacture both. This innovator product has been on the market for many years. It's trusted, it's tried, it's well known. We have a lower cost, unbranded biologic that we're bringing to the market to compete in the overall space to provide cost savings to the plan and to patients. That's your message. It's almost like they came out with an authorized generic as a branded pill and tablet. Comes off the same line, it just has a different name, or it's an unbranded name. So the purity of the molecule, the trust in the molecule, the legacy of the molecule, that's their selling point to physicians and patients and to payers. Now, the payers are going to look at that and say, that's great, but you need to compete on price because, as both Chronis and I alluded to, our P&T committees have viewed the entire molecule, whether it's innovator, biosimilar, or unbranded, as same. So you got to have both sides of it. You got to hit on everything in order to get the uptake that you may want for that type of product.
Yeah, and let me just add to this, and this is a tricky one, so take this with a grain of salt. branded generics haven't been received too favorably in the market. Now, this is a long way from a branded generic. However, sometimes we look at things and we say, make the choice. Stick with the innovator or stick with the unbranded. But when you have both, can you really, the tendency is to say, well, look, we have both products. But then it really can confuse the market. I know it confused our docs a lot as to, hey, why wouldn't we do this? This is a no-brainer. Well, I think the strategy with an unbranded, I think Michael hit it on the head. I mean, go with the value prop, and there's no stronger value prop than familiarity. But it's got to be priced like don't expect the payer to pay a premium for when there's biosimilars in the market that we think are equivalent.
Right. And you've touched on this a little bit. It's a really interesting point. You've talked about the need to have these extra services, educate the physicians. Let's talk a little bit about the patient, because when you think about health literacy and the patient's understanding of this area, major issue. So what should the products be doing around that, with these unbranded biologics?
I mean, you've got to support the product. Physicians will change behavior when they know patients will pay less, and they have the confidence to prescribe. I think it's really about the support. And I think where the challenge comes into play are these are all high cost agents. And, going back to my Lipitor example, patients went from a $50 copay to a $10 copay. They could feel it. Their pharmacist and their doc reassured them, and life went on. These are products where chances are you're not paying for the innovator product copay. You just aren't, right? Because there's a copay card that's out there. And then we're going to have to try to convince you to get a different product at that same zero copay or more. That's a challenge, right? So I think again, we're not going to solve for these sort of market, we didn't get here overnight, these market dynamics. But I think the overarching theme is you're going to launch a biosimilar regardless of what it is. It's table stakes. Patients are going to expect that they have the resources and they have everything and then some that they had with the innovator product.
Fred, I would take this even a little bit higher than that. And I agree the support services and the wraparound services is critical. But think of it from a patient's perspective. Back in the early days when generics started hitting the market. Generic, is it the same? Is there something different? Boy, I was on a brand. It's a generic? What does that mean? Am I going to be okay? Patients will listen to their physician if their physician believes in the product's efficacy and safety. But if I'm the manufacturer who has an unbranded biologic, play off of the word biosimilar, which we are not, because that word similar doesn't mean same. It's similar. Kind of like the old generic literacy would have been back in the early days. If you come out and say unbranded biologic, back to my purity, legacy, stability, history, and it's just a new, cheaper alternative for the tried and true product you've used for many years, then maybe you can pivot that mentality away from, similar is maybe not what I'm looking for as a patient. I want same. And that means unbranded. So it really comes down to the messaging. Now, again, a lot has changed in the last 12 to 24 months. That even biosimilar adoption, biosimilar awareness, biosimilar education has typed to kind of diffuse some of that fear. But it's not all gone. And it will take a couple more years, a couple more products to get the comfort for patients. Payers and physicians know it, but the patient community may not see it right away.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Chronis?
No, it's spot on. You've got to kind of lean on what your strengths are, and then just support the stakeholders. And I think we're going to, again, this isn't going to get pulled through like small molecule. This is going to take some effort, and we've got to get there.
In this final thoughts, are there any areas we didn't cover or things you'd like to comment on? You, Michael, or Chronis?
I would just say if you're having an unbranded biologic as well as your innovator, you have to definitely differentiate from a list price perspective. In today's environment, pricing across biologic, biosims, and unbranded within the same molecule are so significantly influenced by price. You have to have clear delineation of church and state, meaning my innovator's here, my unbranded is at a lower price, and we're out here to help patients, physicians, and payers see the same product coming to the market at a much lower list price for those who need a low-cost option.
Yeah, and, I think the tendency, and this isn't a specific manufacturer, this is just years of dealing with manufacturers, is the tendency is to overvalue that familiarity and that same product off the line. And then you kind of get into a competitive problem, especially when the class has set the established floor price. What, if any, premium are you going to be trying to get? And I think that's the wrong strategy.
Well, Chronis and Michael, I'd like to thank you both for joining us on this episode brought to us by Janssen. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for the opportunity, Fred. Appreciate it.
And thank you for joining us today. If you like this show, you can find all our episodes at amcp.org/podcast, on our show page at healthcarenowradio.com, or on your favorite listening platform by searching Healthcare Now Radio. You can follow our show's social hashtag at AMCP Listen Up, and don't forget to share, like, and follow AMCP.org on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. I'm Fred Goldstein for AMCP. Until next time.